Okay, well, it's 12:01, so I'm going to
Yeah,
get
let's get going here.
started. Hello, I'm Dr. Jenny French. I am curriculum school leader expert and developer of Think Circus Foundational Reading and Linguistics program. And I am here with my friend and colleague and adolescent literacy expert, Dr. Katie McKnight. And we have a very full agenda today. So, Katie, I'm going to let you kick us off.
All right, cool. So today we're focusing on key ingredients for building a successful literacy intervention program, and it's really just been on the forefront about what we can do. So here it is. I don't have a magic wand. I wish I did. Jenny and I were just talking about that earlier today. It's a complicated problem that has complicated solutions, but not so complicated. I think once, Jenny and I kind of delineate those today. So what's the situation? I know many of you are aware of what the situation is. Our middle school, high school literacy progress is in crisis. So I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And then 7 steps. So we broke it down to 7 things, 7 steps to build a secondary intervention program. And then we're going to talk about foundations of reading and linguistics. So those top 2 strands of Dr. Scarborough's reading rope, and then resources and connecting. So, and we're going to do all this in an hour. So, all right. So here's the situation. Here's the problem is that, NWEA has done 2 kind of major reports. And one of them, the one on the right, that graphic, was one that was put out this summer and shows what our growth rates were in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade for reading. And you can just see it just went down to the basement. I've been saying anybody who'll give me a forum and an opportunity and a mic, I just keep saying that our middle school reading progress right now is at a crisis point that cannot be ignored. We can't pretend that it's not there. It was hit the hardest in the pandemic. And notice that 3rd grade reading and math did have some growth during COVID. And I was just interviewed by Ed Week last week, and I said, I don't have a scientific study for this, but just looking at the data, it's really a no-brainer because there's all kinds of initiatives and focus that's on 3rd grade reading, but we don't have that on middle school. So we need to get on it and not pretend that the problem is going to go away. So and then if you can just flip back real quick, Jen, on that left, new report that just came out from NWEA, Nation's Report Card, that's 13-year-old reading scores have dropped 7 points in the last decade. So again, it's a crisis. And this group, middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, had the biggest drops out of any grade. Mm-hmm. All right, so moving along here. So that's the, grim news. But that's the situation. That's the problem. And of course, as educators, we're eternal optimists, right? So there are very specific things that we can do to raise student performance and to solve this problem. We solved the problem of the pandemic and Apollo 13ing schools. We can absolutely solve this as well. Was it ideal? No, but it was a call to action and educators responded to that. So the first is just really creating that culture where literacy is privilege. So getting kids into small collaborative groups. This isn't just a make them up from Katie. This is based on research. We know that when kids have small collaborative groups in their learning, whether you call them stations, centers, rotations, it doesn't matter. That small group instruction is key. And then literacy tools that we're using in all content areas and disciplines. And I say this until I'm blue in the face, that ELA teachers are not reading teachers. It's like asking the chemistry teacher to teach algebra. So science teachers are not necessarily math teachers. Reading is a very specific discipline. And oftentimes what I see is that the young ELA teacher, brand new, right out of teacher school, is assigned the reading intervention class, and they don't know what to do, nor do they have any resources. So we need to get at this and promote that deep reading and well-crafted writing, and that leads to rich subject matter and retention of students and retention of those skills. So we want to develop these skills in that deep reading and well-crafted writing, because automaticity with those skills leads to that sustainability. And then there's 7 key ingredients that Jen and I identified for building a literacy reading intervention. And this is where, you know, her background as a district leader is just so huge because she's really good with systems, just saying that on the side. And so we identified these 7 ingredients, these 7 components. So it's climate, assessment, scheduling, and many of the pre-webinar questions that were submitted to us had to deal specifically with scheduling, you know, those bare bones logistics. How do I make this happen in a middle school schedule or high school schedule? Staffing, and then actually teaching it, the act of teaching, and then monitoring progress. So looking at assessments, using data in smart ways, and then practice, practice, practice. I was just speaking at the Florida Reading State Conference over the weekend and heard Doug Fisher speak. And he kept talking about practice, and practice is so essential for developing the skills, but it's conspicuously absent so many times in our teaching. And it's because of the time pressure. So actually some practice and making sure kids practice is actually going to save time and maximize your time. So we're going to talk more in depth on that too. Okay, so this one's me. This one's me, right, Jen? Yeah. Okay, on climate. I'm looking. Yeah. So climate. We know this also from Hattie's work and visible thinking framework, and creating that environment ready for learning. So minimize distractions. It's really ironic. One of these days, I'm going to write something on it that. I always see this generally, the lower performing schools or the schools that are struggling or on watch lists and such, they have so many distractions, so many interruptions that are happening. I hear the intercom all the time, interruptions to classroom instruction. Classroom instructional time is sacred. And we shouldn't have announcements over the PA, phone calls. I am so glad that I never had a phone in my classroom. Now I'm really dating myself. And then providing opportunities to promote independent reading. And there are some interesting things about that as well, that oftentimes we promote independent reading in classrooms and schools where students are struggling, yet kids in higher socioeconomic statuses, they're doing reading already. They come from environments, homes where that's encouraged. So that reading independently is huge. And I've got some very specific suggestions for that. And I can think of one high school in Wisconsin, where all the teachers and staff all put what they're reading outside their door. And even the guys, the men and women who are working in the cafeteria, physical plant, they have what they're reading too. So it creates this opportunity to talk about books, talk about reading, talking about journals, magazines that we read, websites. And then stigmatization of reading intervention with this age is really huge. So I always say, when I meet a middle school reading interventionist, I always say, you need a full-time social worker in there, because kids know, they know that they're struggling. They know they're having difficulty with reading, and then they equate that with how smart they are and what they're capable of. And so we need to really get at that and making sure that students are see this as opportunities of growth, that it's how do you remove that stigma, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And then class sizes. When we can, the programs that I see that are most successful, make it a priority to use any kind of funding that they have, whether it's Title I or any kind of specialty funding that may be offered from the state for reading intervention, that they use that to reduce the class sizes as much as they possibly can. I oftentimes see too, class sizes reduced for honors or AP students, and we need to do that for our intervention classes, because we know that if you can get those class sizes smaller, we can get more eyes on that student, more opportunities for those students. There's a lot too on research that's out there about tutoring and getting kids caught up in improvement. And it really, what we can glean from that is that it's reducing that teacher to student ratio. And then support too. So in one of the most successful reading intervention middle schools programs that I've seen in a middle school, more than, I think it was about 60% of their students needed some kind of intervention, and in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And by the time the students started 9th grade, of that 60%, the majority of students in the middle school, it was about 90% were on track then by 9th grade. And I'm going to talk more about that too, that specific school, and how they were able to support their students and make things a priority. This isn't an afterthought. This has to be foundational and a cornerstone to students succeeding everywhere in all of their academic work, but do I dare say life, that this is really a life or death issue. We're all very aware of literacy and competency in literacy, chances of poverty, incarceration, etc. So this is really a life or death issue. Not to sound overly dramatic about it, but I do believe that. And then Jen is going to talk about assessment, right?
Yeah, and we had several questions come in and submitted about assessment. And this is something that always comes up when Katie and I are in schools, because elementary world has tons of assessment. They're almost like just overwhelmed and inundated with different types of progress monitoring, but there's nothing at middle school and high school level. And so typically what you see at middle school and high school is, they take whatever their normative, their norm formative assessment is and utilize that. But that doesn't work, and I'll explain why. So what we have to do, there are really, different components of reading. What we typically test for in those norm reference tests are reading comprehension. But there's two pieces of reading comprehension, right? So if we look at the simplistic view of reading, we have word recognition and we have language comprehension. And so in a test, we have to be able to decouple those two things so that we can identify where the learner's weaknesses is. So if we say, like look at Scarborough's reading group, there are two types of categories. So for struggling readers, you have readers that are struggling because they can't decode, and you have readers that are struggling because they are low in language comprehension. And so until you break those two apart, you're not going to be able to help move that student along. So what we usually do is just test everybody with read intervention. We put them all in an intervention class, and then we typically support them with language comprehension skills. And we miss that word decoding or word recognition piece. And so we're not able to move those kids along or push them further. We have to have an assessment that will decouple both of those. And so typically what I suggest or what we recommend, you can use your NWEA, use your iReady as kind of your original screener, your wide net that you're casting. But then you take the kids that you've identified as 2 years or lower, behind in reading level, and then you can't stop there. You have to further identify to see which component or category they are in. Are they a struggling reader because of word recognition? Or are they a struggling reader because of language comprehension? And that's what the DIBELS assessments do. And so I usually promote DIBELS. I don't get a cut from DIBELS, but just being around in schools long enough, they're very accessible, they're research-based, they're solid, and they're free, which is everything. So the maze assessment is what you give that will really test those language comprehension skills. So if you're not familiar with the maze, it's basically a reading passage, and DIBELS assesses K through 8. So if you're high school, start with the 8th grade reading passage. So you'll start with the 8th grade reading passage, and there'll be blanks where there should be words. And so students have to select words that go in those blanks based on their background knowledge, based on their vocabulary, context clues, inferencing. So it gives you a really good gauge or measurement of where that student is with language comprehension. The DIBELS oral reading fluency test or nonsense word fluency will really break down and look at those word recognition skills. So nonsense words, if you're not familiar with that, students will literally just read gibberish or short 3 to 5 word nonsense words or made up words that really look at their decoding. So they have to rely on spelling rules and sound to symbol correspondence to be able to see what their phonics level is. So the problem with that, the challenge with that at the secondary level, the maze you can give whole group. The word recognition, which is typically why it's not assessed in middle school and high school, is because it has to be one-on-one. And so I can talk more about that. We're really on a tight schedule, but there are solutions around that. One of the districts that I worked in middle school, we used basically a SWAT team type scenario. So we took every adult in the building, we paid them to do one after school training, to do the DIBELS training, and then we took 2 days in the English language arts classroom to assess all of the students in the oral reading fluency. And so we had 5 or 6 adults in one classroom and knocked all the assessment out that way. But there's a lot of different creative ways that you can do that. But when we get asked the question about what assessments do we use, where should we use, those are typically the 2 that we recommend because they decouple those components and they're free. And then the other issue after we identify these students, okay, so we've got them identified, who do we choose? And this is like Sophie's choice. And Katie and I have had this discussion cyclically, like we go round and round, like the bubble kids or the bottom 20% are kind of the 2 schools of thoughts, right? So the bubble kids are typically selected. Those bubble kids refer to the 10 or 15 points below or above, whatever the cutoff score is for a standardized test, or the bottom 20%, literally the 1 percentile to 20 percentile students on your NWEA screener. So which do you select? So the schools of thought, the bottom 20%, usually they're getting special education IEP supports, or maybe they're getting ELL supports, and they have more supports, the bubble kids don't. So there's this whole dilemma of who do we select? And really the most important thing to note is this: we can't choose. Literacy is a civil right. Everyone has to be remediated. We have to provide intervention for everyone. And okay, we're thinking logistically, scheduling wise, we can't. Okay, so if we have 60 to 70% of our students or more needing remediation, this is not a remediation issue. This is a tier 1 instruction issue. So if we're not doing anything to remediate our tier 1 or to build up our tier 1 instruction around reading, then it's like putting a Band-Aid on an amputation. It is not going to work. So this whole premise of our session today is all built around the fact that you are dealing and working on your tier 1 instruction. And if you are, then we can scoop up the others by putting in a reading intervention program like this. But if we're not dealing with tier 1 and we're trying to scoop them up, we're not going to see an effective program. We're not going to see our readers mimic.
Exactly. Yep.
And then the other thing is scheduling. So this is the thing Katie mentioned. We get tons and tons of questions about scheduling. And I get it. It is 50% of the challenge is just figuring out when you're going to teach this. So here are, some things that we recommend or throw out just to kind of think outside of the box before and after school. Katie mentioned Title I funding. There's also grants, if you're familiar with the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, a federal grant that pays for after school and before school care, even up through high school. And they will pay for curriculum, for staff, for transportation, for snacks. It's the only grant that I ever know.
Yay, snack budget.
Don't pay for food. So, but look into that. And that grant is coming up soon here. It's going to be released like at the end of February. It's highly competitive, but can bring hundreds of thousands of dollars to your building or into your community or district if you get that one. So that's a great place to scoop in remediation. That's a lot of ways school meet their STEM, their employability skills. How are we fitting that all in? And they'll do that through their after school programs. Saturday school, a win time, a specific course for reading, like an elective type or specials course, and then working it in, doing a flipped classroom or core content integration.
Hey, Jen, folks are asking the name of that grant again.
21st Century Learning, it's 21st CCLC, Century Community Learning Centers. And that's
There's got to be an acronym, right?
It is. It's a mouthful. But that will be coming out in February. So look into that. And I will tell you, as a grant writer, it is the most difficult grant I've ever written. It's over 120 pages. But as being able to implement, it will change your community. It will change your
Can you chat GPT that one? No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know about that.
If only.
Yeah. So as a school leader, so if you're a principal or you're a school leader and you come and you bring an initiative to your staff meeting, what's the first thing you're asked? When am I supposed to do that? Right? What am I supposed to fit that in? So it is 50% of your challenge. And so ideally, we would say a when or a what I need period. So you can kind of repurpose a homeroom or a flex hour, a 0 hour if you have one. One thing we strongly suggest, do not replace that when period with students' specials. Don't take away the gym, the music, the choir, the band, the STEM, the shop class. Don't take those away to replace those with a reading lab or a math lab. Because if what we know about secondary learners, motivation is everything. So they already dislike coming to school, they already dislike reading and math, and now you've just taken away anything that they remotely enjoyed about school and replaced it with something they struggle with. So that's hugely demotivating for attendance and as just engaging with the learner. And so avoid that, just avoid that at all costs. How do I create a win period? So there's different ways to do it. Ideally, you have to shave it off of all the other periods. And this is an example of visual. If you take 5 minutes off of each period, you can create a 35-minute period if you're working with a 7-minute or a 7-period day. So there's different ways to do it. Yes, the con to that is you're already tight with instructional time during the day, trying to get kids in and focused, and it's taking 5 more minutes off. I get it. So it's just one option. And then Katie, I'm going to let you talk about this. This is really your wheelhouse.
Yeah. So, thinking again about, schedule, and then how do we build it into our, core subject area? So, there's different things that we can do. Of course, the always popular bell ringer of focusing on us, especially if classes are leveled, that bell ringer, that opening may be a specific lesson on foundational literacy. And working on a specific skill. Flipped classroom, where students, I'm sure everybody's aware of flipped classrooms. They've kind of fallen out of fashion right now. I don't hear as much about them now as I did maybe 6 years ago. But again, that they do something outside of class and then practice in class. Block scheduling is key. That would be wonderful if you could do that, because then you have time to put kids into centers and different flexible reading. Different flexible groups. And I have been in classrooms where the reading interventionist or some schools, some districts have a English language learner support teacher that they push in. So imagine in block scheduling, and this also, fits in with stations, rotations, those small collaborative groups. I'm a quote regular ELA teacher, for example, and one of my centers is language vocabulary. So we're working on vocabulary or looking at figurative language. I can have students either dive off and work with the reading interventionist at that time, or they can go the other way and there's a lesson that they do, like learning new vocabulary. I mean, all the kids need to do that, right? So learning the vocabulary, but they also need some work on like syllabication, decoding skills, things like that. And they can work with the reading interventionist. Same thing if there's like a reading together center and the kids are reading out loud together, maybe have those students separated out. And then one group is working with a support teacher or you as the classroom teacher, teacher of record, and working on fluency and checking for prosody and things like that. And then flexible grouping is key, especially at this level, at middle school and high school, that once they have decoding down and the more they're reading, they can grow very quickly. I have seen growth in some kids, especially in middle school, 2-3 years. It's like all of a sudden they're just on fire. And so that does happen. So we don't want that student to be hanging out all the time. So that, in the group that the intervention group or tier 1. So as soon as they're ready and they've got it, then they've got to move out. They got to move with the group that's most appropriate for them. Again, this middle school that I mentioned earlier, that's what they did too. Every quarter they met and did that student need to get moved out of intervention? And they scheduled the way the students scheduled worked is that they were ready for it too. they were ready when that student needed to transfer into the other class, and allowed for that, and worked on transitions to make sure that they had the support that they needed. And that's why they were so incredibly successful. And we're gonna talk about this as well, but that leadership is so key, of having district leadership and then building leadership, the principal, the AP, that everybody's on board and supporting the teachers to do this. We can't keep thinking that if we just give them a program and plug the students in at the computer lab, that it's going to take care of this problem, because it's not. and we have the hard evidence that keeps showing that it is that interaction, talking about what we're reading and what we're writing and getting those small groups together. That is what makes the difference. It's part of what makes the difference. Mm-hmm. And why it's one of our core ingredients. Mm-hmm. So here's some more ideas of like different ways that you can structure it. So, each one of these has about 12 students in it, because somebody asked me, like, what do I think is ideal for intervention? And I think somewhere in between like 12 to 15 is really ideal, because then kids still have the opportunities to pair. They also have opportunities to be in small collaborative groups, and I can have a teacher-led center. And then if I have a co-teacher, they could also be at a teacher-led center as well. So that first one is more paired. It's collaborative discussion, debate, drafting kind of thing. And then self-paced. Sometimes students work individually. If you do have a computer-based program, they're not in front of the computer all the time. They step in and step out. And that's really important, that they have those opportunities to discuss their reading and writing. That is also part of what we know from research, is that we all need to, even adults, talk about their reading and writing, that leads to deeper understanding, deeper comprehension, and it's really one of those social aspects of reading. Frank Smith wrote back in the 80s that reading is a socio-psycholinguistic process. So socio-linguistic, socio-psycholinguistic process, that's like the word of the day. And then that last one, is again, small group Socratic dialogue. That could be teacher-led, it could be student-led. And this is part of what I was talking about with climate. Students are in an intervention class or in tier 1 instruction. They're very well aware of the social implications of that. And the more we can make it like this is a dynamic class, it's an interactive class, it is at the same kind of climate level as what I would see in an honors class, an AP class, that we have serious work here to do. We're serious students, but we're also enjoying what we do and enjoying what we're learning. And I realize that that's a big sack of bricks that we got to carry, but that is what leads to success. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have the opportunity today, Jen and I are actually starting a podcast, and that's actually going to be one of our topics, is looking like how you do that. What are the little things that you can do to create this climate? Mm-hmm. And then with staffing, professional development. Let me say it again, professional development. You can't blame the victims, right? So Jen and I talk about this too, as teachers of adolescence. We're both ELA teachers, social studies teachers. Did I have knowledge as far as how to teach reading? Absolutely not. So I was a teacher on the south side of Chicago. I taught high school and I taught middle school. And I had students in, my sophomore English class who could barely read the word "the," but I was not equipped. I didn't know what to do. I learned that when I went to graduate school and earned 2 advanced degrees in reading and literacy. That's when I learned it. But I didn't have any of that when I went to teacher school. So most of us may have had a course in content reading and writing, but it doesn't get into the brain science as far as how reading works, and how that when we prime the brain for reading, it also primes the brain for learning and deep subject study. And so we need professional development that's targeted. Most often, what I see is crisis response professional development. And there's no follow through, there's no carry through. So it needs to be thoughtfully done and keeping your eyes on the prize, even though there may be other distractions, things like that going on. But if we're focused on getting at the reading challenge that we have in our school or in our district, then that's where the focus has got to stay at least for 1 year. Notice I say at least. If it can go beyond that, that's even better. And yes, even the math teachers are affected by this, are impacted by this. So we know there was a meta-analysis that was, I always say it's always people over products, always. Teachers are the solution, not the problem. And so with professional development, it's something like a mean of 40 to 70 hours of targeted professional development will lead to a 13% growth. And so let's treat each other like professionals and create those opportunities for inquiry, and that this is sacred time. And we're not going to have something usurp that time when this has been our professional focus. And that requires leadership. That it's got to happen with leadership. I see a lot of crisis stuff that happens in schools. So, and it's not a blame thing. It's just pulling the curtain back, and this is our reality, and this is one of the things that's keeping us from our vision. We want all kids to be successful readers and writers, and what is keeping us from that? And so those opportunities for collaboration and planning, PLCs. I have a colleague, Steve Ventura, who does quite a bit on PLCs, and he always says it's better to, if it's a bad PLC, it's better to not have a PLC. And that's something else too. We have to be trained in it. There has to be accountability. Again, that school that I had mentioned, such strong leadership, all the PLCs worked very well. And did it work that well from the start? No, but it was that focus and that persistence from leadership that gave them the results that they had. And then also support staff need to be involved in it too. So if we're starting a reading program, reading intervention, all those colleagues need to be together. The paras need to be part of that, and so do the aides. And I hear that from paras all the time. They'll say, you know, Katie, when you came in and you showed me how to do blank, blank, and blank, I was able to help all the kids the rest of the day. They want it too. They want to be part of the conversations and part of that community as well. All right. Yeah, teach. The most important verb here, right?
Seems obvious, but there are just some very specific things we want to point out. And so when we talk about the science of reading, there are really a few key factors that make something, research-based and that kind of fall under that umbrella of science of reading stuff. And so one of those most important things is the instruction has to be explicit and systematic. And that's really important because right now, especially when we have students who are in middle school and high school, they're there because they have a lot of gaps and holes in their foundational reading and their foundational knowledge. And so we have to go back and start at the very beginning to fill in those holes. And so it's very direct instruction, explicit, meaning saying what you mean and showing it very clearly. And then that systematic is sequential and chronological. And that's part of how our brain works and learns. And reading, and especially because skills build upon each other. Background knowledge is the other piece of that science of reading. We know our background knowledge and our comprehension increases not just based on how well we read, but how broad our background knowledge is of what we're bringing to the table with the reading experience. And so anything we can do in our classroom where we are making sure that instruction, so if you're given a curriculum or you're trying to pull things from pay teachers, one of the reasons that doesn't work is because it's not systematic. You're pulling these different pieces and there's no system to that. So that's a very important piece in a curriculum that you have to have with struggling in foundational reading.
Can I interject real quick here? So let me just say something with like teachers pay teachers, and this is where I listen and can hear people groaning on the webinar. So again, why are our colleagues doing that? Why am I feeling like on Sunday night, like, I don't know what to do or whatever. And I go to find something and they're paying their, own money in order to do this. So it doesn't work because it's not contextualized. That's number one. Number two, it's not following a scope and sequence. So this year, I don't know, it's just bizarro. I keep encountering schools and districts where there's no written down curriculum. So I would say 80% of the schools that I've worked with in the last 2 years, there is not a clearly articulated scope and sequence.
Mhm.
Just saying. And I'm like, so that's like an issue right there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's a huge challenge at the secondary level, because most of the time they don't, priorities go to elementary students with curriculum. So they get the textbook funding. Like I'm in Indiana, students have to pay for their own textbooks, and so those monies go towards providing devices. And so teachers, especially at the secondary level, have to create all of their own curriculum. For new teachers trying to come in and piecemeal those things together, that's not systematic, and they're doing the best that they can. But we should have never put them in that situation to begin with, but that's where we're at.
Yeah.
So that's one of the key things, if you can do and change about your curriculum, or as you're maybe looking at new curriculum to adopt, make sure that it's building background knowledge and that it has explicit and systematic instruction. And the next
And that goes back to the first slide, right? Where I said, what's the difference between third grade and middle school? Resources, money,
right.
Legislation, focus. So, and that's exactly a perfect example of that.
Right. And just the attention, aren't getting the attention. And that's really where the problem is. And so modeling for students, being able to model, especially in reading, sometimes we know we need to model, a chemistry lab. But no, we actually have to model even how we shape our mouths with different sounds and different types of things. Modeling is huge when we're talking about reading foundations and employing high leverage strategies. And I put in here just a graphic of John Hattie's work, and Katie mentioned that earlier. John Hattie's Visible Learning, his 250 influences, that it's a meta-analysis, so a study of studies that have been done over the last 20 or 30 years. And it breaks down over 250 components. So as a curriculum leader, every year I would start my PDs with this. And so what are we doing? What can we drop? Where can we've only got so much time in the day, and we know that. So are we utilizing the strategies that have the most impact? Because it's not a guess. We have the science around it of what creates the most retention and the most understanding for students. So are we utilizing those strategies? There are only a few things, if you can kind of see it, it's a small graphic, 2 red dots. So those are things that negatively impact student learning. There are only a few things that actually decrease student learning. Most things do make a difference, but since we only have such a narrow focus of time, we have to choose those strategies that make the most difference. And so that's where this piece really, really comes in. So if you're thinking about your next professional development, or not sure what to do for your next PLC, there you go. Review John Hattie's 250 learning influences. Yep. And then this piece is the gradual release of responsibility. And when we're in a lot of classrooms, I kind of see one thing or the other, Katie. I don't know about you. I see either no, like scaffolding. It's just, here you go, take it, do it on your own. Or I'm the teacher, I'm modeling, but I'm going to model the entire period and never give over any control to kids to do it on their own. I kind of see like one or the other. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, totally. And I think as students get older and older and older, there's this assumption, well, they should know that. And the fact of the matter is they don't, or they don't know how it's done in Dr. French's class or Dr. McKnight's class. So you need to show them. And again, remember, it's practice, 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 practice. So we need to model that over and over and over again. So it has to be concrete, and we have to take the ambiguity out of it. Because if you do that, for instance, as a bell ringer or a mini lesson at the beginning of class, it sets the stage for your entire lesson. And I'm being very explicit. So if you look at most content area reading and writing strategies, we're always talking about modeling and showing kids how I think as a historian, how I read like a scientist. And kids need to see us as adults do that in our different disciplines. So.
Right. And then the last point on here is curating impact and appropriate resources, and we'll underline in bold appropriate.
Yeah, exactly.
Because what happens is we don't have, if you're a reading specialist for, a secondary school, well, good for you, because that never happens. There's
yeah.
specialist in the secondary. So that's
Yeah,
great.
tell us where you work.
Yeah. But what typically happens now, you're probably calling the elementary reading school specialist and saying, what are you using? Can I borrow some of your stuff, or I'll go look for my own? Well, I showed you that Scarborough's reading rope, and the K2 piece is all word recognition, and that matches the marketplace. So when you're trying to teach word recognition, it's made for students who are 3 through 7 years old. If you put that in front of a kid that drove to school today, that's not going to go over well. So that feels humiliating. That feels offensive. I'm not going to engage and learn with that material that you placed in front of me. So we have to be very respectful about the resources and the curriculum that we present to students when they're at the secondary level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amen. Preach.
Okay, go ahead, Katie. You take
Yeah.
this.
So, again, so monitoring, so progress monitoring, so tracking data, regular checks for data. I know in a lot of districts, folks use iReady or they use NWEA, but really looking at that data and what does that data reveal? And as Jen suggested, using a free dibble even, or asking kids to read out loud and listening for fluency and prosody. And then weekly or biweekly review of data. So here's what I've seen that works is that in schools where the PLC, the reading intervention group, they meet together and they review their data. And they review their data, they see how students are performing, and then they adjusted their mini lessons or, the I do part as far as gradual release is concerned. And they would see, for instance, that students are still having some difficulties with syllabication. So they're going to hit it hard like that week in that cycle, and then they plan together. So the teachers have a regular time where they review it. And in all the cases where I've seen really great success at one school where 90% of their kids then were on track for 9th grade, is then they reported it to the principal. It was just a simple email and with 3 bullet points. We did this, this, this. We identified syllabication as an area of need based on the data from our students' performance. And then we created 3 additional lessons and additional practice on syllabication. And that's all they did, and they reported it. And that principal, not every week, but she would go in and she would look for that. And she would look to make sure that that was happening in practice, or one of her APs did, and just saying, hey, I noticed that if you saw it or you didn't see it, and she would respond to it and say, hey, I noticed that you guys identified syllabication. I saw that lesson. That looks great. I look forward to seeing, the improve, just the changes in the data. Or, hey, I know the group decided on more lessons on syllabication because it was identified as a high need. I went into your classroom and I didn't see any evidence. Can you tell me why? And because that's also part of it too. Everybody's got to be on the same page. They've all got to be aligned. And if we're going to really get at this problem and be successful, and that again requires leadership. Practice, 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 practice. Persistent practice. I heard Doug Fisher at the Florida State Reading Conference last weekend, and that was one of the things he brought up, is that practice is conspicuously absent these days, and a lot of that is just this pressure we have about time. But it's not just, for instance, in the reading intervention or the ELA. It's got to happen in the other classes too. And this is where professional development comes in as well. So imagine if I'm working on syllabication and a student goes to science class and the science teacher is really deliberate and says, okay, endoplasmic reticulum, this is how we break down the word, and shows that, then the student gets even more practice, but also setting the time for it and making sure that we're honoring that. I was reading in a neuroscience, neuro nerd article very recently that it takes approximately 400 repetitions to create a new synapse in the brain. But if you're engaged in play and interaction and social interaction, it only takes 10 to 20. So if I'm engaged, I'm interested, I'm talking to others, and it's replay. This is what happens with video games. Like video games have been studied a lot on this, is that when you do that and you're involved in play, you retain it more. So there's been quite a few studies and looking at platforms where, video games can actually teach new habits. But keep that in mind. So if I'm teaching students, again, I'm going to bring up syllabication because I keep using that as an example. And if I'm doing that, they're going to need a lot of repetitions in order to get it. And they obviously didn't get it in primary, so we have to make sure that they're getting it now and really making sure that that happens. And the repetitions could just be something as simple like I have it up on a wall. So every time I come in, I'm looking at it, I'm seeing it. I notice that, that my teacher put something else on there that day. And then I go into my health class and I see something. That's why, word walls, for example, word walls are not a bad thing. They got kind of like, for a while, but word walls are actually not a bad thing. And every time I'm going in, I'm seeing the words up there and thinking about those words, and those words are being used in class. And all of that repetition is going to lead to internalization of that new vocabulary, and it becomes part of my idiolect.
Yeah. And I'll just speak to that practice piece too, because I want to be able to, if anything, give leaders and teachers permission that it's okay, because so much of the time you feel like I'm not allowed to stop and stay here in the curriculum because my kids don't get it. I have to continue to move on because I've got to keep with this map. I've got to keep with this pacing guide. And so there's the test is coming, whatever it may be. So there's this pressure to rush through before kids are ready. But if you're moving before 90% of your class is ready, what's the point of teaching it in the first place? The whole point is that they learn the material, right? That's our whole point for being there. That's our whole point for showing up. So guess what? You have permission. And this was a building leaders and teachers, like as a curriculum director, when I would sit with my teacher and like, why did we move past this unit? Well, we needed to get to the next one. It was June, or it was, it was on the date on the calendar. Okay, well, the whole reason we're here, is so that they get it. And so you have permission to stop and help them give that time, build in practice time, build in margin in your day so that you can create a space for them to practice. Otherwise, what's the point? Because they're not going to retain it. And that's why I always say that's why sophomores still don't know what an adjective is. So one thing that I wanted to also share, so if you're a school leader, a district leader, lean in. This is what will make your program successful. So as we talk about a reading intervention program, it's not in a silo. And that program can't be successful unless we talk about it in context of all of your other school initiatives. And so this is a document that Katie and I use, and it's an initiative inventory. And so what I would suggest and recommend that you would do is go through and list all of the initiatives that you have going on this year, or if you're pre-planning for next school year, then write out every initiative from the drop-off and pickup line is changing. Canvas, we have a new grading software, and list all of the new things on one space that are going to be new initiatives for you as a leader, for your teachers. And then what you go through is really rate those, like, why are we doing it? What's the financial commitment? What's the time commitment? What's the perceived level of effectiveness? And then you go through and you rank those. Sometimes we have to do them. Some of them are non-negotiable. Maybe you'll realize some aren't as important, or they're not worth a financial commitment and the impact isn't as strong. So maybe you can eliminate that one. But wherever this reading intervention program is, it needs to be at the top of this list. If it's not at the top of this list, it's not going to succeed. It needs the special extra time and attention. We've only got so much mental energy and effort that we can give to a space. So make that space reading, because that's going to impact every other thing that you do on your list. Like nothing else matters except that. If kids leave school and can't read, what's the point? So that has to be number one on your list.
So can I interject here for a second? Because we've gotten kind of a bunch of questions that are kind of similar to this one. And another Jennifer said that she's a high school reading specialist in a building of 3,700 students. And she said, I traditionally focus on family or on freshmen only, but even that's too many. What is the best way to utilize one person to make an impact on reading in a large building? So I responded back to her with an answer that really isn't an answer. And I just said, wow, Jennifer, just wow, we need like 10 of you. We just need to clone you, right? And I want to address this too, because this is what I'm talking about on that first slide, is that are you going to make it a priority and have resources, initiatives, legislation to address this or not? It is unrealistic to ask poor Jennifer, our participant, not the presenter, to ask poor Jennifer to do this for so many students. So kind of what I'm thinking is that of she being in a leadership position, because obviously as a reading interventionist, she knows about reading. And as we all know, those are far and few between at this level of having a true reading specialist for middle school and high school. And I would suggest that she's in that leadership with the backing of the principal, the district, et cetera, and that there are additional classes or additional like aides, paras, someone that she can start training to push in these classrooms to support the students, and then also like having a win period as well. Because if you're looking at 37 students, like 1,000 of them are freshmen.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing there's got to be about like 500, 600 kids who need her, is what I'm guessing. I don't know. Maybe Jennifer, you can tell us over in the QA. But you look like you're chomping at the bit to say something there, Jen.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I don't know the structure of your building if you have instructional coaches there, but if reading is your specialty at the secondary level, then what I would have you doing as a building leader is I would have you leading professional development and
Yes.
modeling in classrooms, because you're making a difference on tier one in instruction, which will impact more students, versus putting you in one classroom, one period a day with only a few teachers. You would be able to make more impact and more of a ripple effect if you were leading PD and modeling in classrooms.
And then, again, before school, after school program, it's more difficult in high school, I recognize, and seeing if you can add that in. And then Stephanie's asking where we can get this particular school leader initiative inventory.
We can put it on the Engaging Learner website.
Yeah.
Right, Katie? We can put it as a download resource on there. Yeah. And it's not there yet, but we can get it up. And I believe also Sarah Q, our VP of Think Circa, she sends out a follow-up email to everyone with resources. And like if we mention resources, she puts those in there. So we can have her include that in the follow-up email.
Yeah, and then also shameless plug too is that if you go to engaginglearners.com and sign up for the newsletter, then when we put when our podcast goes live, which we're hoping is our first inaugural episode will be by February 1. Woohoo! We've already had to re-record it twice, and because I'm sure many of you out there are familiar with the Science of Reading podcast that another company puts out, but we wanted one focused specifically on 4th through 12th grade because our needs are different. Like Jennifer is saying, she's got like 1,000. Yeah, she just said, I've got 950 students according to our iReady scores. 630 are not at grade level. That's unconscionable. Let me just say this on the record, and I'm really glad that it's being recorded, is that it's unconscionable to ask one professional to be responsible for 630 students. That's malpractice. And so, that has to be addressed. So anyway, so if you sign up for our newsletter, we send out resources all the time, and then we'll have the podcast. And actually, Jen and I are working on a book too on the science of reading, very excitingly titled The Science of Reading Book for grades 4 through 12. So, and that should be out sometime this summer, but we're really committed to the hormonal, the hormonal students of our world. So.
Well, one thing, I know we've only got a few minutes, so I did want to talk about this because it goes with the success of the implementation. So
I love this, by the way. I got all nerded up when Jen shared this with me.
If you're not familiar with this model, it was a game changer for me as a leader and someone who is responsible for rolling out all these initiatives, and then some worked and some didn't. And then it was just kind of like, let's see what happens. So this model like sums it all up. And so now I always give this to leaders, or when an initiative is coming out, regardless how small or large it is, you need to have each one of these 5 components in place: the vision, which is the why, the skills. So the PD, the training, don't send out a new curriculum. You didn't get your McGraw-Hill, but you haven't have it like, and opened the website or the book yet. You have to have the skills and the training. You have to have the motivation. So building leaders some incentive around what am I going to get out as a person or a professional for doing this? The resources have to be in place, and you have to have the action plan. And what I love about the Noster model is that it really shows you, and do this in your own experience. And I love doing this in professional development time. So think of an initiative that you were part of. Think of, maybe how you felt. I was really frustrated. Then work backwards. Well, I didn't have any resources. So I had all the training. I was ready to go. I was motivated, but the textbooks didn't come in until second semester. So I had zero resources and I was really frustrated. So anyway, you can take this model, screenshot it, or just Google it, the Noster-Lippitt model, and apply it. And I think you need to have all of these parts before. So as you're planning your reading intervention program for next year, go through and make sure you have an articulated response for each one of these components.
And that's the other thing too. If you're lucky enough that you have the resources, the personnel, and the ability to address everything, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But most of us don't, right? And I always say that's the curse and blessing of being an educator, is that there's always more that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And so that inventory is really helpful to just get very get at that granular level and get super hyper focused, and even almost like a vision board. If you have to just put it up in your office and you see that is the focus. Schools that I see and districts that I've worked with that have been in the most successful in improving student growth and turning things around are literally, they're relentless. They're like a dog on a bone, and there's all kinds of distractions. And you have to remember, there's always going to be a distraction. There's always going to be something, but what is the focus? And really drilling down and making sure that that's on your vision board, and that is the priority.
Mm-hmm. So we only have a few minutes left. So there were a lot of questions about resources. So I do want to make sure that I mention this. So Think Circa, I've had the privilege to partner with them to develop the foundational reading and linguistics program. And so as we're talking about resources, the whole goal with all of the challenges that we've discussed today really was to meet those challenges. And so as we developed this program, we tried to do, the two things, our two goals with it was really to meet the word recognition skills and curriculum resources for big kids, and then also remove the stigma from that. And so we use the term linguistics because that's something smart people do. Remediation is something dumb people do, just to strip it bare. So what we do is we want to teach or treat our students respectfully. So we have a linguistics course, and it is the study of language. And so we divide it into the 5 categories of linguistics, which meet all of the same requirements for foundational reading. And it's also helpful for tier 1 instruction, because even if you have a fluent reader, they might not know that no English word ends with the letter J. The spelling rule is GE or DGE. So even though I can read fluently, I may not know that. And now it's going to help me, with my word attack skills. We have a huge morphology section, which can help with ACT, SAT prep. So it's good for any learning.
So let me just say, so imagine if you have centers and you have one where it's like a linguistic center. Mm-hmm. And then you have a cluster of students who are going to work more on those beginning level kinds of things. And then you have students who are working on those advanced kind of things. So you can differentiate it based on what your students need within that core instructional course. And mm-hmm. and so that's really key. And the other thing too is that the materials are there, they're vetted. And so it's pretty simple to actually differentiate that. So I don't have to go and figure out what am I going to do, for Hermione and her group, and then, the different levels of students. So they could work at that center, and they're working on that while being online.
Right. So the student experience looks like there's a video. They start with a video that front loads. It's 2 to 3 minutes animated. The skills lesson it's all online. It's independent practice. Again, we created this so that it could be student facing and not reliant upon teacher expertise, because we know everybody's situation is different. Mm-hmm. It's student facing. So they go through their skills practice, and then they have a reading practice. The reading practices are nonfiction. They're written at an 8th grade level. There's an in-text glossary. Everything has audio support. It translates into 60 languages. But what's special about the reading practice is that it will apply whatever skill they've just learned. So if they just learned the DGGE rule, the just sound, then that passage will be filled with those, and those will be highlighted. So they can see that immediately in context and application of a passage that's their level. 18 units, approximately 100 days of instruction if you're using a 45-minute period, but there's lots of different ways to skin a cat, so you can implement it all kinds of different ways. Tons of reporting, self-paced, and then, yeah, we wanted to hit some of these things too. If you're interested in finding out more about the foundational learning and our foundational reading and linguistics program, contact Think Circa or Sarah, and we can set up a demo and answer any other questions that you have. But yes, if you haven't already, make sure that you're following the Engaging Learners website, contact and connect with us, download those resources there, look for our podcast and book. We also have a University of California, San Diego partnership. Think Circa has just partnered with them, and we're going to be offering a professional development opportunity where teachers or administrators, it's for any educator that's teaching reading to adolescents, and you'll get 3 post-baccalaureate college credits. You can do it asynchronous or synchronous, and I'm teaching that. So if that sounds like fun to you, that will be happening this summer, and then we'll do one in the fall also.
Yeah.
Katie?
And yeah, and then to sign up for the newsletter, if you go there, you scroll all the way to the bottom is the link for that. But just to save you guys some time, just go to engaginglearners.com/newsletter and you can sign up. And I don't sell my newsletter list to anybody. That's just for our community, and it may be like once a week. So once we finally load up the first inaugural podcast, and we plan to do about 2 a month, and you know, that'll always be posted there, and then when we publish our book, and will also be out too. But we want things to be really pragmatic. And as we prepared, you know, this webinar, you know, one of the things that's daunting for us is there's so much to consider on this, and so many variables and so many factors. So we thought, you know, what in 1 hour, you know, can we give you to at least get the ball rolling? And also feel free to reach out to us on engaginglearners.com. Also with the, you know, we're good friends with Think Circa as well, and love their work, which is, you know, why I do webinars with them. And it's always, you know, what is pragmatic? You know, what can we do? And that really is my key word all the time. It's just like, yeah, this would be ideal. This would be wonderful, but this is what we have. So how can we make that work? Again, so yeah, so you can just reach out to us there.
Yeah. And I'll even say, like, as you're working on your initiative inventory and you're trying to work on plans for next year's reading intervention course, hit up Katie and me through her website, and we can help, you know, coach you through that if that's something that you need extra support with. That's what we're for.
Yeah, we're colleagues. So
okay, anything else?
I think we almost hit it like right when the bell rang, you know, at 1 o'clock Eastern time. So woohoo, you know, considering how much we had. So I just want to say I always end every PD or webinar with, and I really do mean this, you know, thank you for all that you do every day on behalf of students. So thank you for making our profession such an honorable and rewarding one.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thanks for your time today.
Have a great one.
Bye-bye.